Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bracy Sports Media. My name is Aaron Bracy, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Philadelphia Eagles reporter Geoff Mosher. Geoff is the co-founder with Adam Kaplan of InsideTheBirds.com, his Inside the Birds podcast, and Inside the Birds TV. Geoff, thanks so much for joining us here today on Bracy Sports Media.
Thanks for having me. And I'm going to just pre-apologize if one of those situations where like a kid bursts into the room. I'm here in my daughter's room. So middle of the day, we'll do what we can, right?
Well, I have 3 kids. I have a handwritten sign on my door that says Daddy's doing an interview. So hopefully they won't come in either.
That's great that they actually abide by the rules. That's fantastic.
Well, every once in a while. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you can listen to this interview on our podcast, Bracy Sports Media, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on our podcast, you can watch on our YouTube channel, Bracy Sports Media. Finally, please be sure to check out our website, bracysportsmedia.com, for a corresponding story to go with this interview. All right, Geoff, let's jump right into it. You are one of the foremost Eagles beat reporters. You've been doing it for a long time for various publications. You started out, we worked in the same company. You were covering Atlantic League baseball for the Courier News. And then we kind of met each other a little bit when you worked in Wilmington. We played some pickup basketball games at Audubon High School, which was cool. But you went on to cover the Eagles for from 2005 to 2012 for the Wilmington News Journal. Then you switched over to Comcast Sportsnet for a few years. And you've been doing various outlets before doing Inside the Birds. And I'm just wondering if you could start by just kind of reflecting on your journey covering the Eagles. And when you think back, kind of what stands out to you?
Wow, that's it's been a long and winding road, Aaron. Well, first of all, as you alluded to, I originally started in newspapers in 1994. I was working at a Gannett paper in Central Jersey called the Courier News, and mostly covering high school sports and then also the Atlantic League baseball, the Somerset Patriots. And I don't know how many people know this, but I was hired by Wilmington in 2015, the Wilmington News Journal, to cover the Phillies. And I was on the Phillies beat for about 2 months. I was there for the firing of Ed Wade and the hiring of Pat Gillick. So a major changing of the major changing of trajectory for the Phillies franchise. Of course, they'd go on to win the World Series. But I moved on to the Eagles beat only about 2 months after joining the paper because there was a lot of movement. And, yeah, then I became an Eagles beat writer. And as you mentioned, I was at Wilmington for 6 years, then at Comcast Sportsnet for 3 more. And then I went to Sports Talk Radio. And then, of course, this venture. It's a great opportunity to be adaptable. I mean, if you can be adjustable and adaptable. The one thing I'll say is that as much as an information giver as I am, and I try to break news, and I think, Adam Kaplan and I do a really good job on Inside the Birds of really giving the Eagles perspective. I don't like to call myself the beat writer anymore because in fairness, I'm not there every single day like a Jeff McGlane or a Les Bowen, and I don't want to take away from the work that those guys do. I do it in a different way now. I'm fortunate enough that even when I stepped away from Comcast Sportsnet in 2015, that I made sure to kind of keep my connections, keep tight, always be on my game so that I could still be a good deliverer of information and a trusted resource for Eagles news, even though I'm not in the building every single day like some of the beat writers are.
Well, as you mentioned, a lot of people don't know about the Phillies, and a lot of people don't know that you have a pretty good basketball game. When we played, I remember you being really tough to guard. Was that a sport you played growing up, or?
Well, you're not really giving away my big secret, and that's that I am probably I probably sweat more than the average person my size, my weight. I'm not that heavy. I'm a normal build, but I sweat a lot, so people don't really like to guard me. I always joke about the scene in was it Cable Guy with Jim Carrey where he's playing pickup basketball and somebody like comes in contact with him and it's all squishy and disgusting. That's me. So nobody ever wants to touch me, and so I'm like an NBA player now. I get a free ride to the basket.
That's one way to do it. Geoff, obviously we're here to talk about football and what you've done with Inside the Birds, which is just awesome. If you haven't listened to Geoff's podcast, you definitely have to tune in. It's a wealth of information, smart, informative, entertaining analysis from Geoff and Adam Kaplan. But I'm just wondering if you could tell us how Inside the Birds started and kind of where do you see it headed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. To be honest with you, it started almost as a hobby. I was at the time working at 97.5 The Fanatic, hosting there, and Adam Kaplan was with ESPN, but he was a part of that huge layoffs that they had, and he was still technically under contract for a while, even after ESPN moved on. And so Adam was looking for something to do. I wasn't really happy with, the mobility where I was at. I wanted a little bit more. And so Adam and I have known each other for a long time. And we have a mutual friend, Billy Osborne. And all three of us decided to try to do an Eagles podcast and see how it would come out. And we did a couple of pilot episodes, and they actually did well on SoundCloud. We put them out, and we're like, hey, we have something here. And pretty soon after that, we were given an opportunity, which we're very thankful for, from WIP to kind of join their podcast network at the time that they were introducing their Go Birds podcast and some other podcasts. And they welcomed us with Inside the Birds, and they helped us produce it. And they gave us some time during the football season. This would be the 2018 football season. On Sundays, they gave us an hour to do the show. And then we did that for about a year. And then we just gradually had some changes to make. Adam and I kind of went about it on our own. And then we decided to branch away from WIP and start up our own, take the podcast to our own platform that are out. And then we were lucky enough to have an agent named Josh Weinfeld who helps us sell the podcast and find sponsorships. And we've been very fortunate. Our listenership has grown just over the last year, probably by 3 or 4 times, almost 5 times what it once was. And it started off pretty good to begin with. So because of that, we're able to have sponsors. Because of that, we were able to start a YouTube page and launch a website, InsideTheBirds.com, that go hand in hand with the podcast. So we have like 3 arms of Inside the Birds, right. The podcast, the website, and the YouTube page. We provide content. I think we get great guests. And I just think in general, Adam and I give a perspective that you don't hear on a lot of other podcasts. And that's great that there's a variety of different podcasts that have all different voices and perspectives. And people definitely, the feedback we get is that they like our perspective. And so we've come a long way in a year, Aaron. Right. And I think by this time next year, we'll probably have even more stuff, live events, things like that we want to incorporate.
Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds joining us here. And you can also go to Geoff's Facebook group, Inside the Birds, and he just started a Reddit page. So you'll find Inside the Birds all over. And I think, Geoff, one of the reasons why people enjoy what you're doing is because you and Adam both are a trusted source of Eagles coverage from having covered the Eagles for so long. I'm just wondering if you could take us inside what it's like to cover the Eagles. It's totally different from what you did with the Phillies, obviously, which is mostly game coverage. Eagles coverage is totally different. And also there's tons of competition out there. And it's a challenging beat because there is so much competition. But I'm just wondering if you could kind of tell us a little bit about what it's like to cover the Eagles, some of the challenges, some of the rewarding things about covering the Eagles for people that kind of really don't understand what you do and how your job works.
Well, yeah. So obviously when you're an Eagles reporter or analyst of any variety, whether you're a beat writer, a podcaster, somebody who's dedicating their career to covering the Eagles, you always have to be ready at the drop of a hat to cover the big news. And you think about things like Donovan McNabb got traded. He got traded on Easter. Wow. That's a family holiday for a lot of people.
I forgot about that.
And so you had to be ready to kind of drop everything. Tom Gamble, he got fired on New Year's Eve by who was it? By Howie. It was when there was a big feud between Howie and Chip going on. Gotcha. And Howie had probably just come back to power, I think, at that point after Chip got fired. And New Year's Eve, you got to drop everything. You got to write about it.
That might be a little hard to write if you're imbibing.
So I think the biggest thing is for those who do it the right way and really want to be information gatherers is that every single day you've got to be on your grind with the people that you trust. You have to have good sources. You have to be able to distinguish good sources from bad sources, from middle ground sources who sometimes have agendas. You have to be able to run your information by more than one person to see if it checks out. And I think, as you mentioned before, that's really what separates maybe Inside the Birds from some other places. I mean, the draft is a great example, first round of the draft. I mean, there had to have been some of the craziest, wackiest rumors about what the Eagles were going to do in the 36 hours preceding the first round. And, at the end of the day, the Eagles picked Jalen Reagor. That's somebody that Adam and I had been talking about for quite several weeks before the draft. So I think we do our best to provide really accurate information about what the team is thinking. We use our best sources. We're no BS, and that's how we approach it.
When you look back on your years covering the Eagles, are there some moments that stick out to you, whether it's a breaking story? I heard you on your podcast the other day talk about when you kind of talked to Joe Banner as a young reporter on the beat. That was a great story to tell.
Yeah.
But are there some moments that stick out to you, whether game or stories that you've broken or relationships you've made when you think back?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can probably think of a story that's each different criteria you just mentioned. I mean, honestly, coming up through the beat, I think one of the best experiences was just going on road trips and being around guys like Rich Hoffman Sr. and Bob Ford and Bob Brookover and Les and Paul Domowitch. And, they had great stories about what it was like covering the Buddy Ryan days, that we would just sit at a bar and I would hear those guys, Phil Sheridan, right? I would just hear them tell Reuben Frank, tell great stories of what it was like to cover the Eagles back in the, the 80s or even the early 90s. Those were moments I'll never forget, and they helped me as a journalist. And then there are those personal times. I do remember, I think my first full year on the beat, being up at Lehigh, and the PR guy, Derek Boyko, walked up to me. And, at the time, Wilmington wasn't known for really breaking news or being competitive with the Inquirer or Daily News. And Derek Boyko said, he came up to me and said, it's really noticeable what you're doing with the beat. We think you're doing a good job. And even Big Red, Andy Reid, has noticed. And I said, wow, that was nice. So at the end of Lehigh practice one day, I'm walking off the field, and Andy usually gets off the field very quickly back then, right? Well, I see him making – yeah, as quickly as he can move, right. He can actually – when he wants to get away from practice, he can move pretty quick for a big man. But I noticed him moving very quickly toward me. He was making a beeline at me. And Andy doesn't have, the nice face, right? Andy Reid's always, practice serious. And he is making a beeline at me. And I'm looking at him, looking at me, coming at me. And I'm like, oh, man, what did I say? What did I write? What question did I ask? And he starts over to me, and he gets right next to me, and he says, I just want you to know, I think you're doing a pretty good job. And then he just walked right away. And I stood there.
That's hilarious.
I had to process that for 5 minutes because I really thought he was coming to kick my ass or something like that.
That's great.
Or yell at me and scream at me. So that was one of the moments that I'll always remember. Obviously, there are games that stand out. Deshaun Jackson, his miracle at the Meadowlands, that huge comeback, the whole Michael Vick time period. My second story ever, right, regarding the Eagles, because I live in South Jersey, Aaron, was drive on over to T.O.'s house because Roseman House is about to do a press conference.
What a way to come onto the beat.
Oh, I know, man. That was an introduction. That was the infamous next question.
Right. Did you ask any questions during that press conference?
I think so, but I don't remember. It was so long ago.
Right.
I may have got people shouting over me. I don't know. I think my head was spinning that day.
Geoff Mosher from InsideTheBirds joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. Geoff, I listen to your podcast. You are, like I said, a wealth of information. So I figure we'll maybe just touch on some Eagles hot button issues, kind of go down through them. I'm going to throw an issue at you, and maybe you can just give us a little bit of insight. First one, will we see Alshon Jeffery as an Eagle again?
This is funny because this is like a big bet that Adam Kaplan and I have going on Inside the Birds. And I am of the opinion Alshon's not going to play another down for the Eagles. Adam thinks it's going to be impossible for the Eagles to trade him with that contract, and so they're not going to have any choice but to put him on the roster and instead of just cutting him and taking that big cap hit. So we'll see. My opinion is that when he's healthy, which might not be until September, October, he'll probably have to start the year on PUP and come off midway through the year, that there's going to be some team out there that's pretty good that lost a wide receiver that would be willing to take the contract on, maybe restructure it with Alshon, just to have a player of Alshon's caliber. So we'll see if I'm right or if Adam's right.
All right, here's the Eagles' last 5 first-round draft picks. I'm going to throw Jalen Reagor in there. We don't know about him yet, obviously, but Jalen Reagor, Andre Dillard, Derek Barnett, Carson Wentz, and Nelson Aguilar. Is Howie Roseman on the hot seat, Geoff?
I don't know if he's on the hot seat per se. First of all, Nelson was Chip Kelly's pick, so I don't
Okay.
think Howie's going to get knocked for that. Carson Wentz was Howie's pick, and obviously that turned out
That worked
really
out,
well.
right?
I think, the jury will decide on Barnett this coming year, and obviously we'll see about Rager and Dillard too. I think that those three guys in particular are going to help determine whether Howie's been getting it right or not. So is he on the hot seat? I think it's warm a little bit. You got to remember, though, Jeffrey gave Howie the power twice, right? So he's very, very fond of the work that Howie Roseman does, even throughout the flaws. So it's going to take a real epic, I think, failure for Howie to lose his job. But we'll see, because Jeffries also wants to win.
We mentioned Dillard, first-round pick in 2019. Will Dillard or Jason Peters be playing at left tackle this season?
Which week? I think it's going to be Dillard to start. It's Dillard's job to lose. They want Dillard to have that left tackle spot. I don't know what's going to happen with Jason Peters. I think that they'd like to bring him back, but does Jason accept the fact that he has to fight it out with Andre Dillard and maybe be that backup swing tackle? Or backup swing tackle who has a chance to win the job if Andre Dillard struggles, which, is certainly possible. But I do think Andre Dillard is the lead horse in the race.
All right, let's continue here. Do you think Malcolm Jenkins leaving is going to turn out to be a mistake or a good decision for the Eagles?
Short term or long term?
Let's look at this season.
I don't think that you can make the argument that they'll be fine at safety like they were. I mean, they're definitely losing a key piece. But I always say in the NFL, Aaron, it's, teams have to get rid of players all the time that are good. And fans sometimes say, well, who are you going to get to replace that guy?
Right.
And I always say it's never about an apples to apples replacement. A lot of times teams lose in one position, but they stack up in another. For example, the Cowboys just lost Byron Jones, their best cornerback, to the Dolphins, but they drafted CeeDee Lamb. They expect to be better offensively. So, yeah, maybe their defense isn't as good, but if they're better offensively, theoretically, with the new coaching staff and everything, that compensates. And so I don't think the Eagles need to have a all-pro caliber safety for them to be as good as they were last year, but they just need to be the best team that they possibly can be.
I have two more here, then I'll let you off the hot seat here.
Sure.
Will J.J. Arcega-Whiteside have an impact this season?
Yes, he will have an impact this season. How big of an impact remains to be seen. He certainly is a square peg in a round hole right now because they have all this emphasis on speed. And so if Deshaun stays healthy, he's going to be on the outside. If Jalen Reagor is healthy and productive, he'll be another guy on the outside. And then you wonder, well, wait a minute. Arcega's not really a slot receiver.
Right.
What do you do with him? You probably have Greg Ward in the slot, or your two tight end, and Zach Ertz is your slot, or Goddard. So I don't think he's a starter unless one of the outside receivers I just mentioned struggles, whether it's Jalen Reagor or Deshaun gets hurt or something like that. But I think they're going to have to rely on him at some point during the season.
All right, and the last one, and I wish I had a nickel even for every time this has been brought up, and you know where I'm headed here, but how will the Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts situation play out this season?
I'm still trying to figure that one out. I think it's no secret from the podcast that I don't think it was the smartest use of a second-round pick. I feel like the people who have come around to like it have rationalized it instead of in favor of the Eagles, instead of really, picturing who else in that slot might have made a bigger impact. I mean, I think that it's hard for me to believe in this short with no camps that he's going to be your number 2 quarterback.
Right.
So, but I do think he'll be active. So I think they will try to incorporate him in the playbook as a second pass thrower on the field at the same time, or a gadget player. I don't like the Taysom Hill comparisons too much because Taysom Hill is bigger and a more explosive athlete. I don't like the Lamar Jackson comparison for a lot of obvious reasons. But that doesn't mean that the player isn't himself going to be valuable or useful. I just have to see how they figure out a way to use him.
Geoff
Mosher, they will.
Geoff Mosher from InsideTheBirds joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. And Geoff mentioned where he thinks Hurts will be on the depth chart. If you go to his InsideTheBirds.com website, Geoff has laid out the entire 53-man roster. Is it is it 53 this year? I guess is it a 53-man roster you have on there? Or
yeah, we did 53. Now I think that you can have 2 more from the practice squad that are flex, but those guys will change. Those guys can change on a week-to-week basis. So it would have been hard to predict each week which 2 guys else they're going to flex in there.
So definitely check out Geoff's website to see the 53-man roster. Tons of information, analysis for each pick. All right, Geoff, I want to shift gears a little bit to the NFL in general. And the big question on my mind and everyone's mind, and I'm sure your mind, I don't know that anyone has a clear answer, but what do you think and I'm going to ask you, what do you think the NFL season is going to look like this year? If you had to predict.
Man, yeah, I wish I could give an opinion that people are going to say, wow, that's really profound. That's different from anybody. But I just don't know, Aaron. I mean, I think it all depends on look, baseball is going to be apparently the first to try to give this thing a go around. And I think we can use MLB as a litmus test as to what to expect from the NFL. It's probably going to be either fanless or much fewer fans allowed in the stadium. I'm assuming, maybe incorrectly, that in the winter, late fall, we'll see a little bit of a spike. So that might trigger some kind of reaction or even proactive responses of keeping fans 6 feet away in the stadium.
Right.
But I'm sure by hook or crook, they're going to try to play the games. I would imagine that they will.
Well, that was, you mentioned fanless, and that's my next question. Like, I can see, we saw with UFC the other night, I can see baseball playing without fans, even basketball to a lesser extent. But for me, like, football is like the one sport where like players really feed off that adrenaline and that energy. And I'm just wondering, from players you possibly have talked to, from obviously you've covered the team for a long time, you've been in the stadiums, you know the emotion, you know the players, you know how they feed off it. What effect and what impact do you think, if we do get to the point where there won't be fans in NFL stadiums, how will that affect the games, do you think?
Greatly. I mean, the Eagles are one of the teams in the NFL over the last 3 or 4 years that have a very, very distinct home field advantage, especially defensively, right? You look at their average points per game allowed at home versus on the road, and it's probably the biggest discrepancy in the NFL. They are just so much better at home. They get a huge jump off the ball with that pass rush that they have, and a lot of that is because the crowd is like, the opponents have to be on silent counts, and that's difficult. They have to spend time all week working on that. So there is definitely going to be an impact there. But the thing is, it affects everybody equally, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, we're going to get back to the same discussion as there's 2 things we know. 1, it's not going to be what we're used to being. 2, is that still better than nothing? Right. That's probably what it comes down to.
Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. As you can hear from this interview, Geoff is just a wealth of information from the Eagles. If you're like me, every time that podcast pops up on my phone, I'm listening to Geoff. Definitely check Geoff out. InsideTheBirds.com is Inside the Birds podcast and Inside the Birds TV whenever you get a chance. And also follow Geoff on Twitter at Geoff Mosher NFL. Geoff, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us here on Bracy Sports Media today.
No, it was my pleasure, Aaron. It's good catching up. Maybe we'll get another basketball game going soon sometime.
That'd be awesome. If you like our podcast, please download and subscribe. Give us a review if you can, and also hit on notifications button. And that's all for today, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us here today on Bracy Sports Media.